A lot of bare-knuckle boxers end up breaking their hands in a fight, but there is a way to avoid it. First, we have to reconstruct the history of punches and learn from the past, as bare-knuckle boxing fights were extremely common, starting from some of the oldest depictions of boxing in Egypt and continuing to the ancient Greeks, up to the 19th century Thais and British. We see that the form of a bare-knuckle straight punch is vertical. So why nowadays the straight punch is commonly thrown with a horizontal fist? Former engineer and fighting coach Chris Price gave us an explanation.
All the punches changed when the gloves came in. People used to punch like this. For 50 years after the gloves came in 1867, Queensberry rules, and then people still used to punch like this until about 1910. Then somebody found that if you screw it after you make contact, you can get cuts, like in the old system. Because the trouble with the gloves is you can't mark your face. So the old system is good because you could split the eye, make the eye swell up to stop them seeing, break the nose so the blood goes in their breathing, split the lips so it's very painful to get blood. So they're handicapped. And then you get a chance to put your strong movement. But when the gloves came in, the face was clear. You couldn't get any damage. So somebody found about 1910 that if you pivot it after the hit, as you're hitting, then you can get the cuts again. So that's where the twist punch comes from. There was no other reason for it apart from that. That's all. The only reason. But of course, by about 1950, nobody remembered that anymore. Nobody knew why. And now you get many people all the time talking about you must turn over the punch.
The vertical fist versus horizontal fist is a debate going on for decades, and it is full of misconceptions. Some say that the horizontal fist is stronger and gets more snap, while the vertical is weaker but faster, but that's not true. There is no difference in power and speed between the two. By looking at the anatomy of the arm, we can see that the radius rotates around the ulna when the fist is horizontal. But that's it. There is no forward component that has more power or range. And everything that happens in a vertical fist happens in a horizontal fist too, with a small exception of the percentage of engagement of some muscle groups, which does not influence power or speed in any way. What typically happens is that some fellows are more proficient with their standard fist, being horizontal or vertical, and when they test the other for a couple of weeks, they are not proficient enough with it, and come to conclusions too early. Or something else changes in their way of punching beside the fist. For example, when trying the vertical fist, many stop using the kinetic chain of boxing and use the punches of Wing Chun. So they feel that the strikes is faster but weaker. Because that's an entirely different way of striking. It's not simply the rotation of the fist that changed. Another common thing is that with the horizontal fist, some hunch their shoulder and become stiff, but with the vertical fist, they keep it relaxed and feel it is faster. So why the vertical fist is better than the horizontal in bare-knuckle boxing? Some say that since in the horizontal fist the radius rotates around the ulna, the alignment is less optimal to transmit force, but I don't agree. There is no evidence regarding that. However, there is scientific evidence that grip strength is reduced in a horizontal fist. Grip strength is important because the stronger you clench the fist, the better the ligaments, muscles and tendons compress and keep in place the little bones of the hand and wrist, creating one solid structure that also helps to absorb the counterforce acting on the hand during the contact with the target. But which knuckle connects? There is a misconception that in old British bare-knuckle boxing, the straight connects with the last three knuckles, because William Harrison Jack Dempsey suggests this method in his famous book Championship Fighting. The truth is that most of the old and surviving sources do not mention which knuckles you should hit with. Broken knuckles were not uncommon, but they were significantly less common than what it is experienced today in bare-knuckle fighting and boxing with blows, with the horizontal fist. The three-knuckle method became famous thanks to Dempsey's popularities, but there is another less famous method which involves landing with the first two knuckles in a vertical straight. It was used by the legendary Robert Fitzsimmons and he teaches it in his book, Physical Culture and Self-Defense. Thus, we can distinguish two methods: the two-knuckle one used by Fitzsimmons, Coach Chris Price, Shorinji Kempo and some karate styles, and the three-knuckle one used by Jack Dempsey, Bruce Lee, and found in some styles of Muay Boran. Wing Chun also uses it, but since the punch mechanics are completely different, there is no point in including it. My interest lies in the most effective way to reduce the chance of breaking the knuckles. Which method is better? First, let's hear what Dr. Chris Raynor has to say.
All of the segments need to be stacked directly over one another, with each of the joints being held as rigid as possible. This arrangement maximizes the amount of force that is transferred through the kinetic chain to the point of contact. If all of the joints between the segments are locked, the segments behave as a column, which is extremely strong in compression. If any of the joints between segments are not locked, some portion of the generated force will be lost in a direction other than that of the punch.
So a key component is taking the individual segments that make a punch. Dempsey believed that the best path to transmit and receive force in a straight was an imaginary line across the arm, starting from the knuckle of the little finger and ending at the shoulder. He suggests testing it on a wall. But Dempsey's line of force is not the one nature prefers, and it is not the best way to hit with a bare-ended straight because it has two flows, and to understand them, you first need to know the anatomy of the end and arm. The function of the knuckles is not to hit but to grasp. Everyone will agree that the first two are larger than the last two, therefore they are more suitable for receiving impacts. The forearm is made up of two bones, the ulna and the radius. The latter is considerably larger and stronger than the ulna, and is aligned with the first two knuckles, while the small ulna is not in direct contact with the bones of the hand to allow rotation of the forearm, and it is connected through a tissue structure called triangular fibrocartilage complex. When a compressive force is applied to the wrist, 80% of the force travels through the radius, while 20% is distributed through the ulna. The first proof is that nature prefers the radius as a path for the transfer of force. Everyone recognizes how a solid structure like the tibia is better suited to absorbing the impact of powerful roundhouse kicks than the instep, but many fail to recognize the obvious anatomical advantage of the first two knuckles and the radius. It can be argued that when performing the Dempsey wall test with the first two knuckles, the index one does not make proper contact with the surface. This is true, which is why a small downward deviation is necessary to align the first two knuckles. The same maneuver is also performed in the correct horizontal punch form. This is the radial column of Chris Price, the most powerful mechanical alignment for transmitting and absorbing force in a straight punch, preventing broken knuckles. And it is in line with what Dr. Chris Reynolds said: every individual component is stacked. Aim with the first knuckle because the second one is bigger and will automatically hit if the first one does. This setup might be uncomfortable at first. Like any other technique in martial arts, it must be trained extensively until it becomes natural. In some old prize fighting drawings, the ulnar deviation is depicted, indicating the use of the first two knuckles as impact areas. The second proof is Newton's third law of motion. Whenever two objects interact, they exert equal and opposite forces on each other. When you punch, your knuckles will transmit and receive force. When you hit with the left three knuckles, the force transmitted and received is divided between all three, and if they all hit correctly, you may not break your hand. The problem is that the head is not a flat surface. It has a complex shape with different curves, angles and hardness depending on the area. And in the case of a fight, the opponent constantly moves, dodges and sways. What could happen is that only two or one of the last three knuckles connect, and since the last two are smaller than the first two, they cannot support the compression received and end up breaking. This is the same problem as the horizontal fist that often leads to fracture of the knuckles of the little finger. It makes no sense to rely on it and the less supported ulna bone. If you hit with your fist vertical, the first two knuckles, you have fewer contact points. This means you are less likely to miss one, and the first two knuckles are larger and stronger than the last two and could resist improper contact. The last evidence is that hitting with the first two knuckles not only preserves the hand, but also increases the damage inflicted due to pressure, which is the action of a force on a surface. With the same applied force, the pressure will be greater the smaller the contact surface is. When you punch with a vertical fist, you will have less contact surface area with the first two knuckles than when using the last three. This means that the more precise you are in hitting the opponent's vulnerable points, the more precisely the force is transmitted to the target. When punching with the last three, you may waste some of the energy on unwanted areas due to the increased contact surface area. If If you aim at the eye with the last 3 knuckles, one of them will hit the bone near it, while if you hit with the first 2, you will concentrate all the power on the eye while also being careful to hit a soft area. In conclusion, following hand and forearm anatomy, biomechanics, science, boxing history, my experience and that of Chris Price, I consider the first 2 knuckles to be the best contact points for a vertical straight punch with bare hands. The vertical fist has also other advantages. Let's hear Chris Price on the topic.
And when you try this way of punching, you'll find that there's a lot of advantages to it. For example, if you're going to jab and left hook, see the elbows down, and then you can come up with the left hook between, so you get more power. So here, your elbows down, protecting the body.
Yeah.
The other guy doesn't get to see much. You don't see all of that.
Yeah.
It's coming straight in there.
Yeah.
So it also goes through a guard better. If you get vertical fist. There's just tons of advantages. It's way harder, something like 10 times harder to break the hand with this one.
Keep in mind that the fist configuration is only one piece of the puzzle. Without conditioning and respecting the power levels, you can still break your hand very easily. This is the hand of the recently retired lightweight champion Dave Leduc at the end of his career.
In this type of training, the athletes are attempting to take advantage of something called Wolff's Law. Wolff's Law describes how bones respond to external stresses. It states that in a normal individual, bone adapts to loads under which it is placed. Bones that see an increase in applied loads will remodel themselves over time to become stronger, allowing them to resist similar loading in the future. The architecture of the bone then undergoes adaptive changes. First, internally in the trabeculi, and later externally in the cortical portion of the bone, which may become thicker as a result.
The easiest and most accessible exercise is push-ups on the first 2 knuckles. These have easier variations, and if you can perform 20 on concrete without any excessive discomfort, your hands are enough conditioned for bare-knuckle punches. Lastly, respect the power levels. When fighting bare-handed, you don't have to throw a full power punch at every target. Some areas are too risky and give little reward. You must preserve your hand while also making sure you throw an effective punch. There are 3 power levels. They are inversely proportional to the height of the target. The higher you aim at the face, the less power you should use, meaning that around the eyes the power will be at its lowest, while in the U-zone it will be at its highest. When the use of punches is risky or not sufficiently rewarding, you should use complementary strikes like swings, palm strikes, elbows or headbutts. So what's the best configuration for the hook and the uppercut? And for strikes to the body? These and many other questions are answered in the new extended edition of my book, Bare-Knuckle Boxing Muay Boran Nam, which has a lot more details on the topics we discussed in this video, pictures from rare Muay Boran and Western boxing manuscripts, combos and much more. The link is in the description. The book is dedicated to Coach Chris Price and there's tons of info about him and his legendary fighting system.